Let's go ahead and create our first CSS selector. In order for us to do that, we need to open up the Files panel. We can also close out of this page that we're working with in the last movie. So I'm going to go ahead and close that. I'm also going to reduce the overall width of the CSS designer, and then I'm going to open up the Files panel. If your Files panel is closed, like it is on my machine, what you can do is go to the Window menu, and under the Window menu, you can choose Files. This will open up the Files panel. Inside the Chapter 3 folder is a file called tips.html. We looked at a similar document in the last chapter. What we want to do is go ahead and create some new selectors. Now, inside of CSS, there's several different types of selectors that you can create. In fact, I'm not going to review all of them in this course. If you really want to learn about CSS as a language, then I strongly recommend checking out our CSS3 courses on Transsimple.com. With that being said, what I'm going to do is show you how to create several different types of selectors that will at least get you to the point where you can start creating web pages. I'm going to go ahead and close the Files panel again. You can come over and right-click or control-click, and in the contextual menu, you can choose Close Tab Group. Now we're ready to create a new selector. Now, what we want to do is create this selector inside of this document. You'll notice right now we have sources, there's a plus sign. If you click the plus sign, you have a couple different options. You can create a new CSS file, you can attach an existing CSS file, or you can define the CSS within this page. For this basic example, what we're going to do is define the CSS in this page. In a real-world situation, you would probably create a new CSS file and place all of your CSS in an external style sheet file. And we'll explore the advantages of that a little bit later on, but I briefly mentioned it in the first video of this chapter. So nevertheless, right now we're going to go ahead and select Define in Page. Once you do that, you'll notice a style element appears within the Sources section of the CSS Designer. In terms of the media, we really don't have to worry about this section at all. You can collapse it. Then we can go ahead and create a selector. Now, if you're not all that familiar with HTML, what you can do is come over and select this text. When you select this text, down towards the bottom of the document window, we have the tag selector. And here we can see we have the H1 element selected. Now, because we have the H1 element selected, even if you place a blinking cursor within this heading 1, it will still be the last element. We can go ahead and create a new selector based upon H1. So again, it's always a good idea to come over and select the element that you want to style if you don't know HTML. This tag selector will certainly help you. You can then make sure that the style element is selected within the Sources section of the CSS Designer. Then you can come over and click the plus sign here inside the Selectors section. Once you click the plus sign, you'll notice that it creates a selector for you. And in this case, it creates a descendant selector, which is something that we'll talk about a little bit later on. For right now, what we want to do is modify this, and we just want H1 as the selector. And what this means is anywhere within this document that the H1 element appears, it will take on the styling characteristics that we define within the Properties section of the CSS Designer. If you go ahead and press Enter or Return, that H1 selector will be created, and then you can come into the Properties section and start making adjustments. Again, I want to keep this as simple as possible, so the only thing that I want to come over and look at are the actual text properties. So you can come over and click the Text button, which will bring you to the text section of the Properties category. You can come over and choose something like a color. We'll go ahead and select blue. And as you make changes here, you instantly see the design view updated. If you want to change the font, you can go ahead and do that. And we'll talk about fonts in greater detail a little bit later on, but I'll go ahead and choose something different here. After changing the font, you could also choose the font style. I'm happy with normal, but in this drop-down menu, you can make the text appear italic or oblique. Now, the reason why you have these two options, italic or oblique, is because if you want an italic type to appear, you need an italic font available on the machine. If you don't have that italic font available, you can go ahead and select oblique, which is a faux italic, which will just digitally slant the text. I'm not overly concerned about that right now. I'm going to leave it set to normal. We also have the font variant. Because this type was typed in with all capital letters, we really don't have much in terms of how we can change this. But if we choose something like small caps, what would normally happen is the lowercase letters would appear as small capital letters. Again, I'm going to come back here and set this to normal. The other option is to come over here and just remove the property. If it's grayed out, it means that that property isn't applied. If you apply a normal value, once you get into cascading your styles, that could play a role and give you undesirable results if you weren't expecting that normal property to be applied. We also have a font weight where you can change how bold the text appears. There's also a font size. There's a line height, which is the leading, the distance between lines of text. In this case, because we're dealing with a heading, it's really not much of an option. You also have text alignment options, text decorations. If you want something like an underline or an overline, you do have that ability. And you also have a text indent option if you want to indent the text. There's also additional options down here, such as text shadow if you want to apply that. There's also text transformations and letter spacing. You have a lot of control over type here when working with CSS. But this is a nice way to see everything that's available to you in terms of properties when working with text. Nevertheless, what I wanted to show you in this movie is how you can go about creating a selector using the CSS Designer panel. In the next movie, we'll create another element selector to style these heading 2 elements.